I'm going to bring back a segment before we get to Ask CJ that I think worked the last time we did it. The trading pile. I'm just going to mention some names. Tell me what's the latest trade chatter around them, and maybe we'll get some fans excited about some trades about 5 weeks away from the NHL trade deadline.
Trade center.
Yes. Trading pile number one. This person was just placed on injured reserve. But they're only going to be out a week. Ben Sherratt. What's the trade chatter around him?
It's been significant. There's been a lot of interest in Sherratt throughout the season. I think Montreal's looking for a return similar to what David Savard got Columbus last year at the deadline. So you're looking at a first-round pick plus something else, most likely, if they're able to get the market there. The good news, you're right, Sherratt suffered an ankle injury in the game Saturday afternoon against Columbus, but from what I'm hearing, it's not too serious. So if anything, I think they just want to wrap him in bubble wrap at this point and, get him healthy to the deadline. I mean, we all know what the season is about in Montreal. And he's probably one of their bigger assets just because he's on a contract that contending teams can add, plays sort of a physical style that I think teams, gearing up for the playoffs are going to want to add. And he's expiring, right? It's some of the other players like a Jeff Petrie who Montreal will put on the market. It's just more complicated because he's got a number of years on his deal. So it's harder for teams to absorb, him being traded. So yeah, Sherratt, I'm confident will be moved. I think he'll get at least a first round pick. And, maybe that trade happens sooner than later with the little injury scare, just kind of a reminder to the Canadiens management about, the potential perils of, rolling him out there every night because it is a physical game.
That is true. Pat, actually, before I finish, how many teams for Ben Sherratt? Because it looks as if there's like a whole bunch of teams who are interested in him.
Yeah, I don't have the number. I think I've mentioned, I know the Leafs have called on him. There's a lot of teams. I think it's funny because, I see he's maligned on Twitter, I see, but he's, I think he fits a specific need that a lot of contending teams feel they have. You're not bringing him in. You probably play him on your third pairing, frankly. If you're a team that thinks you can win the Stanley Cup, you probably got four better defensemen than him. But, he's big and physical, and the playoffs is hard. It's a different game. Style that can win in the regular season doesn't always win in the playoffs. And so I think it'll be a number of teams. There's been interest in him all year long. I think because he was one of the teams, Montreal's season's been such a disaster. You were confident if you were a GM in November, December, that there would be a seller, and he's an obvious piece to be sold.
That's true. Pavel Zacha in New Jersey is next on the trading pile.
Yeah, Jeff Merrick, I saw had a report that Vancouver's interested. I mean, he's just in an interesting spot in his career because he's 1 year from UFA, Zacha. So he kind of controls the circumstances a little bit in that he could just sign a qualifying offer and walk himself to UFA in summer 2023. And so New Jersey's going to have to consider that. They've also got some younger players. And, he would be a nice piece. We'll see if Jeff's report on Vancouver is right, but you can see why the Devils would at least be looking at that kind of move, just because it's all about managing your asset. And, it's start of the career, the teams control a lot of the leverage in these negotiations. The deeper you get in, the players got more mechanisms to make more money.
What about Vitaly Kravtsov, the Rangers prospect? He's still under Rangers. They still have his rights, I believe.
They still have his rights. And, earlier in the year, he'd asked for a trade. That kind of cooled off a little bit. But I do think, New York's a team that's going to be a buyer at the deadline. He's one of the things they can buy with. He's their credit card as they go into the shopping mall a little bit, in addition to their draft picks and a few other prospects they have. And so, there's definitely been some interest in him, but he's a prospect that never met his didn't meet the hype with the Rangers. And now you get deeper into the career. And so how they view him and how the other teams view him hasn't fallen in line because they still view him as sort of a blue chip. And I think there's some question about that around the league, but it wouldn't surprise me at all to see him traded as part of, whatever buying that the Rangers do at the deadline. Nick
Ritchie of the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah, his stock's way down too. It just hasn't worked out. The Leafs signed 4 forwards in the offseason. 3 of them have hit. And the 4th one is Nick Ritchie, who's, just never found a place in the lineup. He started with Austin Matthews on the top line. progressively fell down the lineup as time went on, and now he's not even playing games. The trick here is he's got a $2.5 million cap hit. And so, the Leafs, I think, are only going to retain so much on that in trading him. And you're trading a distressed asset, essentially, a player who hasn't performed too well for you. He's still young, though, 20, 25, 26 years old. So I think that there's a world he gets traded, but it's not an easy move. And the thing the Leafs would be balancing is if they have to give up, like if they have to sweeten the pot too much, it might just be worth holding on to him and buying out the final year of his contract, because that would only count next year $300,000 against the cap. And so, I think that's kind of the line that's being balanced here as they work through those trade discussions.
Sorry, did I hear that right? $300,000 against the cap
next year? Yeah. So instead of $2.5 million to be a player, he'd be $300,000 bought out next year. So it's a $2.2 million savings. Which I'm sure they'll buy him out unless there's some dramatic like rise from the ashes moment here. There's injuries and he gets back in the lineup and finds his game. Barring that, I would think that's where he's headed, unless they can find a way to move him.
I didn't realize that it could go that low in terms of like a salary allotted if you buy out a guy. I didn't realize it could get down to $300,000. I always just assumed that it could only go down to like the minimum salary. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and then the following season he would be $1.1 million.
Sheesh.
But it's still worth probably doing if you don't feel like you can play for the team, right? I mean, it's like the Leafs, well documented, are always doing the tango with the salary cap ceiling, and so that money will be valuable for them, whether they're signing Jack Campbell in the offseason or for other additions that they're pursuing. I sort of feel like, because where they are with the cap, like they had to make those 4 forward signings, like they had holes to fill. The fact 3 of them worked out, Michael Bunting, Andre Kasha, David Kampf have all really fit in nicely with the team on sort of bargain-ish contracts. If you hit on 3 out of 4 when you got to sign 4, I think you're doing pretty well, all things considered. I mean, I'm not defending the Richie signing per se, but they were bargain shopping, so they weren't going to walk out of there with classy threads on free agency day.
That's true. A final member of the trading pile for this Monday edition of the CJ Show, Marc-Andre Fleury. That's a name we've discussed a lot on this show.
It is. And, what's interesting with his situation, it doesn't sound like there's really been much talk between he and the team about whether he'll be traded. Him and his agent, I don't think, have gone there. And really, we don't see a lot of goalies move at the deadline. Here you have a potentially elite goalie. I mean, obviously, Marc-Andre Fleury is coming towards the end of his career, but, he's still a pretty high-end performer. And, I don't know if he'll be traded just because, usually contending teams have their goaltending sewn up. There was a time, I'd heard the Colorado was quite interested in him, was maybe going to flip Darcy Kemper somewhere else as part of that. Well, Colorado, they barely lost in a month and a half. Like they, they just keep winning. So, and certainly, I saw yesterday Jared Bednar had some nice things to say about Darcy Kemper. So, maybe that situation looks a little different. And so it seems like Fleury is going to probably come down to the wire, unless, a contending team has a serious injury to their top goalie in the next couple of days. Maybe the timeline will change, but barring that, I think it's going to go to the wire and, see if there's a fit for Mark somewhere else.
Before, actually, I kind of lied about making that the segment before we get to Ask CJ. I think Craig Berube also got an extension last week too. I should have mentioned that at some point earlier on, but wondering if you have any thoughts on that before we get to Ask CJ.
Well, he earned his extension, right? I mean, went into this year, it's not a comfortable place for a coach when you're coaching in the final year, and the Blues have had a great season. So 3 years, he's making the good money now. I mean, it's good for him. And, we've seen the value of that. But this was a week where 2 coaches were fired, right? And, getting those extensions is big, because it doesn't guarantee he's going to get to coach all 3 seasons beyond this one, but at least he'll be getting paid for them. And I think well-earned for him. I mean, he won a Stanley Cup as an interim head coach, and, shown that he's got some staying power there with how well the team's performed. I think maybe even a little bit above what outside expectations were at the Blues this year. They're kind of below the radar. I didn't even mention them when we were doing the tier 2 sort of cup contenders. Like they probably deserve a spot in there too. And I overlooked them. I just sort of a team that's under the radar right now.